Hi everybody. Just getting started. I'm going to wait for people to show up. We'll wait for our official 12:15 start time. There we go. Happy Wednesday, everybody. Just kind of plodding through the weeks. For me, it's week 3 of being home. My husband's been home. My husband's been home for a full week, 4 weeks rather. So I started making some little clay figurines to help me keep track of the days. Mitchell's here. I think I'm going to take my glasses off for now. That way I don't get mud on them. If you're just joining us, leave me a comment. I should be able to see them. There's about a 20-second delay, so if you ask any questions, I'm going to have to kind of look at my iPad to see when they pop up. They won't happen immediately, so I will get to them when I can. And at the end, if I should still have some more time, I'll try and go back through the comments to see if I missed anything. But I'm going to be doing a wheel demo, just kind of a basic how-to. There's a technique that I saw some other potters using that I want to try, using a fork to add some texture. So I will try that today. I tried one yesterday. It worked out okay. This is the piece that I tried it on. So I added fork texture all the way around, and then I stretched it out. The trick with this is once I add that fork texture on there, I can't touch the outside, otherwise it makes it go away. So it's a little bit challenging in that way, but it's kind of a fun way to add a little bit more detail onto your pot than, just a smooth outside. So I thought I'd try that today. We got about 45 minutes to go through our clay, and I don't have any way of seeing what time it is. I'm going to have to touch my iPad. Oh, Sandra's here. Hello, hello. So I just want to get my clay ready. Now the wheel that I'm working on is called a Randall wheel. It was originally designed as a kick wheel, and it's been retrofitted with a motor on the bottom of it. So I'm not quite sure how loud it will be for you, but you'll hear it when I push that lever to turn the motor on. And I'll try and talk loud enough so that you can hear me, but it will make some noise, and that really helps me get it up to speed so that I can center it. When I'm starting doing that, I need to be going fast, and the motor helps me do that part. And I'll try and use the kick option as I'm working, but that'll be my exercise for today, I think. This guy has been waiting in my parents' garage since my junior year of high school, so that would have been 2005. And I refinished it a couple of years ago in anticipation of it coming to my house. And my husband and I had it in the garage. We brought it out here last summer, and it's been waiting. And we got it downstairs without breaking ourselves or anything else on the stairs, which was a feat unto itself because it's about 150 pounds. It has a big flywheel on the bottom, and that's what helps keep that momentum. Hi, Karen. Good to see you, sort of, in the virtual realm. So I will be using this big wheel. It's got an orange tractor seat. kind of molds to your bum, which is somewhat comfortable, but can't do quite as long of a throwing period as I do on just a pure electric wheel like we have in the studios. So for those of you who are going to be following along and maybe doing this yourself at home, you want probably a good 3 pounds to start with. I like to compare my clay to fruit, so I would say I have a tangerine's worth of clay. I am using our woodfire clay because I'm anticipating doing raku firings in the summer. Glassfest has kind of been pushed back until the last weekend in July, and we're hoping that we will be demonstrating our raku firing on Market Street in Corning on that Saturday of Glassfest. And for that to happen, I need to start making some stuff so that I have some accumulated to do our demonstrations for everybody who's walking by on the street. So I'm using the woodfire clay for this today. It's pretty nice to throw with. That's what I made the squish dishes with last week. So it's also nice to hand build with as well. But it's smooth. It has some grog in it, but it's not like it's going to rip your hands up too badly. The other things that you're going to want to get going, some water. I prefer warm water because I don't like sticking my hands in the cold stuff. You're going to want kind of a yellow sponge. I think anybody who's been to our studio is fairly familiar with that. I like to use silicone ribs. These are the mud tool ribs. Yellow's my favorite, and then I have a little baby one that works as well. And then for the technique that I want to show you, just need a good old fork. This is a fork that I have long-term borrowed from Alfred University and the dining hall. And pin tool, we'll definitely need that. And if you have any wood tools, something with a long point or a curved end, those are actually good to work with. So I have a few balls of clay ready to go. I'm going to start with this tangerine and get this guy centered. Now when you start, you want to make sure that your clay is round-ish. It doesn't have to be a perfect ball, but you don't want to have any dimples on the bottom of it, otherwise that might trap air underneath. I have a bat to work with. If you don't have any bats, you can certainly work straight on your wheel head, but I like this because it allows me to kind of change and make multiple pieces at once, and then I don't have to worry about taking my bat pins off either. And then I highly recommend using a towel on your lap because it will get everywhere. I have this big bowl to kind of keep me protected from the spray, but you'll see as I go along how far it can go out. And I know I'm going to be reaching over to get my water, so that is going to get me a little bit muddy, but that's okay. It'll wash out. All right. So my bat is dry-ish, and I'm going to move the camera a little bit so you can kind of see what my hands are doing. I'll move it back once we kind of finish what we're doing, and hopefully that gives you a good angle of what's happening down here on the wheel. So I'm going to slam this down right there in the middle, and then I like to give it a couple whacks to make sure it's still attached. So to get it centered, I'm going to turn my motor on, so you're going to hear a loud hum. Hopefully it's not so loud that you can't hear me, but let's give it a go. So I want to get my hands wet, I want to get the clay wet, and to center, you want to have your hands kind of right in front of you to push the clay away. Now when I'm centering, I kind of go right into what's called coning, which is when you bring the clay up and down. It helps to work it out, make it more flexible, more plastic. This is pretty fresh clay, so it's soft, it's easy to work with. If you had a stiffer clay, or if it was clay that you were reusing after a flop or hand building or whatever, you'd want to do more of this coning than what I'm doing, just so that you can work out any potential air bubbles or inconsistencies in your clay texture. So for me to cone, what I like to do is I like to push with my left hand right here on the heel of my palm, and then I squeeze squeeze from the other side. So I'd say I'm at 7 o'clock and 1 o'clock. And then when I squish it down, you can use this squishy part of your thumb or the heel of your hand. Your other hand should be right in line to help keep that centered so that it doesn't go all over the place. Now as you work, you're going to accumulate that mud, so just scrape that off. To try the technique that I was talking about, to get that texture with a fork, what I need to do is I need to throw something that is fairly thick so that I can stretch it out, and I need to have it be pretty straight and vertical. When I was practicing yesterday, I noticed that when it has curves, it's a little bit harder to control it, and because I won't be able to touch the outside of it to keep it from going all over the place, I think if we have straight walls up and down, that will work a little bit better. So I'm going to just kind of shape this a little bit more. I'm going to flatten the top out so that I can start a hole. So on an electric wheel, I tell my students to start with this at the top speed. Set your speed and you can kind of focus on what your hands are doing. Now because this kick wheel is not quite as smooth as an electric wheel is, I need to pay attention to when I'm touching the clay and when I have my foot on the motor or when I'm kicking it so that I don't knock it out of place. Right now I think we're doing all right. I'm going to use my thumbs to open up right in the center. I'm going to dive right in. I find that opening works a lot better when you're decisive about it. You don't want to be tentative about putting that hole in there, otherwise you're more likely to go off center. So when you're ready, you can put a couple more fingers right in there to help stretch it out and widen it. And before I get too complicated with my shape, I want to take a minute. I like to use my sponge to compress the bottom on the inside. So I'm just skating back and forth right on that clay bottom. So I'm using my sponge and going back and forth to compact that bottom of the pot so that it doesn't develop any hairline or S-cracks as it dries later on. It's a small step that really does make a good deal of difference later on. Because unfortunately, those flaws don't show up until after your piece is dry, and there's not much you can do about it once those develop. So I'm going to start to pull this up. And you want to start at the bottom by pushing in, and you'll see that indent start. And then I'm going to squeeze mostly with my outside hand. My inside hand is just kind of following along. I'm going to pull that clay upwards. Now I'm not trying to get all of my height in one go. If you work too fast, that's when you start to get unevenness or thick and thin spots on your wall. Going a little bit more. You want to add a little bit of water as you're going. So I end up putting more pressure down here at the bottom where I have more clay. And then it's like a decrescendo. I want to lessen my finger pressure as I go up towards the top. Because of course the top is going to want to be the thinnest the fastest. So I'm going to clean up the bottom a little bit before I do the next part. So you'll hear this scrape in just a second. Save that for later. The other adjustment that I have to make is, keeping my throwing water and the debris that I'm going to get from all of this mud that I'm scraping off and not having it go down my sink down here. So I've set up a 5-gallon bucket in the sink, and I just use it as kind of a pre-rinse before I wash anything else off, or before I rinse my throwing bucket out, because the clay will kind of settle and accumulate in there, and then I can just pour that out in the backyard. The clay won't hurt anything in like a compost pile, but it will definitely hurt your plumbing. So you want to make sure that you are paying attention to that if you're working at home. It's something that we have to focus on when we're in the studio too, with all those reclaim buckets. So I'm just going to scrape a little bit at the bottom and clean that up. I like using the right-angled wooden rib for this part. You can use the pointed nose to get underneath a bit. There we go. And I'm just going to smooth out where that tool was making marks. Now the other thing that I kind of figured out after trying this technique yesterday is I want to rib off the outside and get rid of any of this extra slip and sludgy stuff that's accumulated, because it'll give me a cleaner texture surface. So I'm going to do that again. Made sure to wear my good work boots so that I can get a good grip on my kick wheel. After kind of calibrating it a bit yesterday, finding the right position for my seat, I greased everything up with some WD-40 and got a bit of that on my flywheel, which makes kicking it a little bit trickier. It's a little bit too slippery, so my big work boots are helpful in getting a grip on that. So I'm going to do this a little bit on the inside too, just to get some of that extra goo off of the surface. Okay. So just kind of rinse my hands to do this part. So now I'm going to try that fork method. So for those of you who are kind of just joining us or didn't see the beginning when I started, I'm going to be using a fork to kind of make texture marks on a piece. This is one that I did yesterday, and we're going to see what it can do in terms of adding some more detail to it. So I'm going to start all the way down at the bottom, and then I'm going to kind of trail off as I get towards the top. Any old fork will do. I like this one. It's got some good weight to it. So I'm just going to cut right in, and I'll spin this around so that you can see in just a second. I want to push too hard because I don't want to distort it, the roundness of this quite yet. But I do want to push enough so that I'm scoring the surface of this, giving it the stripes. And what I'm doing to kind of keep my stripes evenly spaced is putting the first tine of the fork in the last stripe that I make. So when I spin this around, I'll show you what exactly I mean. That way I can kind of eliminate any of the overlaps. So there's that last line that I just made. I'm going to put the fork right in that line. And that way it kind of keeps everything a little bit more evenly spaced, so it's not quite so willy-nilly. But, you know, more haphazard lines could give you more dramatic results, possibly. This is something to play around with. The reason I'm trying this is there's a technique that I used quite a bit last summer. Some of our students might remember some of the pots that I was making. They had kind of a crackly surface on them. And I got that surface result by using a material called sodium silicate, which is an additive. We sometimes use it in the glazes to kind of help keep things deflocculated, everything get into suspension in a glaze. but it's also used as a surface technique material. So what you would do is make a form similar to this. It'd still be kind of thick, and then you would brush on that sodium silicate right onto the surface and start to dry the outside surface with a heat gun or a hair dryer, and it dries the outside edge or outside bits of your pot while still leaving the inside gooey and soft. And then you would do the same thing that I'm going to show you in just a minute, where you work from the inside out and change the shape of it. It's kind of like putting a candy coating, like a candy apple, on your pot. So as you work on the inside and stretch it out, you get this really cool crackly effect. The reason why the sodium silicate is not the best thing to use into the studio is because once it dries, it gets very sharp. It's almost like a fiberglass texture, and it gets embedded into your fingers, and that doesn't feel good. And it leaves this weird, really hard dried gunk on whatever surface it touches. So it would be hard for us to control that in the studio to not ruin any of our bats or the throwing trays for our splash pans on our wheels. And it's messy. It yields a cool result, but it's not the easiest thing to use in a studio, a community studio like ours. So I'm trying this as an alternative to that technique to see if I can get something that's somewhat similar. And unfortunately, I don't have any of my examples of those here to show you what that looks like, but it's similar to that pot that I showed you a couple minutes ago. So I'm going to get this back up to speed, and I'm going to work with my sponge directly on the inside. So I'm going to turn that motor on again. Kind of sounds like a plane getting ready to take off. So I'm going to go all the way down to the bottom, and I'm going to start by pushing outwards. I don't want to do this too quickly because I could tear the clay. Now, by stretching something, you're going to make your piece shorter, which is why I thought it was good to start with... Hi, Sarah. I thought it was good to start with a taller cylinder, because as I stretch this out, it's going to get shorter and shorter. So you'll have to keep that in mind if you try this yourself. I'm trying to figure out how to get my pieces to not be quite so squatty with this technique, and to be a little bit more cylindrical or vase-like. So you want to keep your sponge or your fingers pretty wet as you're working the inside, you know, so that it's not sticking on the clay. I kind of like the shape that we got going on in here. I'm going to use that silicone rib on the inside to get a nice curve going. Down here at the bottom of my pot, that's where extra weight likes to hang out. I would call it the ankle of my pot. It's not the foot, but it's not in the belly either. It's down lower, down right down about there. That's where extra weight tends to hide on my pieces. So when I can push that out, that helps to kind of eliminate that bulkiness. So I'm just working on that inside shape right now. I did that compression earlier, so I'm not trying to make it deeper, but I am trying to work on that transition from the wall to the foot, or the floor of the pot. So it has a good curve to it. It's not angular. It doesn't have like a lip in there. I'm pretty happy with that. And then I'm going to use this guy. Our students will recognize this. This is just a piece of suede chamois with a bobber on it so it doesn't get lost in our reclaim, so it floats in our bucket of water. But this is really ideal for working on the rims of things because you can just hold it right over the rim like that. Helps to compress the rim and make it a little bit stronger, as well as rounding it over so that it's not sharp and prone to chipping or breaking. So something I like to do to my bowls is to flare out the rim, because then that allows them to nest even if I didn't make the bowls all together. I like to put them in the cupboard so that they stack together, and by flaring it, it helps that happen. So you can just use a damp finger right on the rim and kind of pull that towards you, and that helps to flare it out. Then you can go back with a chamois, kind of smooth it again. So I think we'll have time to do another one. Does anybody want to see a particular form that I could try doing? If there is, just shout out in the comments for me. Otherwise, I think I'm going to go for a vase. And I might use a little bit more clay for that. 2 balls of clay instead of just 1. So just smoothing out any of that grog that showed up in the bottom so it's not granular. Ooh, and as this slows down, you might be able to see some of that texture showing up. Now I think we could change this texture even more if I hit this with the heat gun before stretching it out. I think that would make that texture even more dramatic. Let's take a look. Pick that up. Ooh, I kind of like how that looks. Get a good view of that. So they kind of went diagonal instead of staying straight, which kind of looks nice. And even though I have all of these little clay crumblies, I'm going to resist the urge to touch those right away, because as this dries, those will be a lot easier to kind of just wipe away. If I touch them now, it's just going to smear it, and that's not going to look so great. So I'm going to set this one to the side. Sorry, give you extreme close-up right there. I'm going to grab another bat and give this a go. Line that up. Okay, let's check our comments. Sarah says a vase. Caitlin says tall vase. We can do that. All right. So, grab another couple tangerines from the bag. So, because these are going to be separate pieces of clay, what I'm going to do is throw one down and then throw the other one right on top of it. So, right there in the middle. We'll do another one. Plop right there. Okay, how am I doing on time? I don't know what time it is. Okay. We'll have enough time, I think. Clock is ticking. Alright, so here I go with that motor. Get everything nice and wet. Now, because these are 2 pieces of separate clay, 1241, thank you, Sarah. I'm going to do some more of that coning than I did the last time. So I could keep my foot down here on that pedal and kind of keep a constant speed. Can you guys still hear me all right when I have that on all the way? So when I'm working with our younger students, I tell them that to have nice strong arms, pretend you are a T-Rex and you have little arms right in front of you. And that helps to stabilize them. Now, because of the way that this wheel is built, I don't have quite as much of the top of my leg to kind of brace on. So what I do a little bit differently is I just tuck my elbow kind of right into my rib cage as best I can. And that helps to stabilize my hands and my wrists so that I'm not transferring that wobble to my clay. And keeping it centered as I go. A gray blah day out today, but stopped raining. It was blustery last night. I could hear the rain just pounding on the windows. I think it's going to get colder for the rest of the week. Brought the heater down here into the basement so that I can not be quite so drafty. And I'm trying to figure out my drying atmosphere down here. So I had two pieces from yesterday, one that I covered and one that I left uncovered. And it dried pretty decently. The one that was uncovered is maybe trimmable in a little bit later on today. And the one that was covered stayed as wet as it was on the wheel. So that's good to know. I know some of you are fairly familiar with our weird drying in the studio. So I'm going to use the tip of this wooden rib and just scrape some of this, or actually the short end, I'm going to scrape some of this clay off because it's not doing much anything out here. Save that for later. There's a good deal of pressure that I'm putting on this clay to get it to cone upwards. Generally, the more clay you have, the more pressure you have to expel with your wrists and your hands. So I prefer to center and cone at the 6 o'clock position right in front of me. There are lots of other ways that people have kind of adapted to make comfortable for themselves. I've seen people throw on the 12 o'clock side of the wheel, and rather than push, they pull the clay towards them. So that's totally valid. Hey, Bridget. This is what feels good when I'm working. So I'm pretty happy with how centered this is. Remember, you can tell if your piece is centered or not by looking at it as it spins. It shouldn't appear as though it is hula hooping. So it's spinning fairly smooth and regularly. Doesn't have a wobble to it, but if it does have a wobble to it, that's a sign that your clay is not centered and that you should keep working on it until it is, and that way when you put your hole in there, it's not off center. That is very common for people starting out to kind of prematurely open their piece, and then walls of their clay are not even, and then you get an uneven top. It's like this high-low thing happening at the rim, and that all goes back to not having it centered before you opened it. So I am going to use 2 fingers. You could use your thumbs. Well, actually, I'm going to use my thumbs because that's just what feels comfortable. So again, you want to be really decisive and drill straight down. And then I go back with 2 or 3 fingers to just open that up some more. Now, With my kick wheel, the motor is either on or it's off. So it's really just like it has one speed. If you're on a regular electric wheel, you would still want to be at your top speed for this opening. Once you start to stretch it out and make it wider, that's when you would want to bring your speed down to maybe more of a medium, not as fast as the wheel goes, but not as slow either. As we stretch this out and make the shape more complicated, that's when you want to focus on your speed, because it would be easy for your piece to just go overboard or flop or get dented or wrinkled or tear if you go too fast. So just like that other one, I am compressing the inside bottom. I want to do it at this stage because once this gets taller, I'm not going to be able to reach in there effectively. So with this being a vase, I don't really have to worry too much about that wall and foot transition, so it can still be kind of angular, more of like a right angle, or something a little bit more obtuse. Doesn't necessarily have to be a curve. When it's a right angle, that helps to eliminate some of that bulky clay that I was talking about at the base. Sometimes what can help if you're having a hard time keeping it straight and the bottom or flat, you can use the short side of your wooden rib and decide whether you want the sharper corner against the wall or the less sharp corner against the wall. I'm going to try that first. So I like to use my fingers right on that hole. I use both hands to hold it so that it doesn't slip, because it gets slippery real fast with all this mud on there. It's inevitable. I know we're not supposed to touch our faces, but as soon as my fingers get muddy, that's when my face gets itchy. Alright, bottom is good. Now I'm going to work on raising this up, working on my pulling. So you want to start at the bottom. There's that indent, with more pressure at the bottom and less as we work our way up. So as you do this, you might get some clay that kind of flings off. That's okay. I'm going to do that again, slow but steady. So as soon as I take my foot off that motor, this starts to slow down, and if I put pressure on the clay, it takes that momentum away quite a bit. But this is one of the adaptations that I have to remember is, you know, as this starts to slow down, as it loses its momentum, that means my hands have to slow down too. Speed of your wheel and the speed of your hands correspond with one another, so you got to make sure that your hands aren't going faster than the wheel is, because then you end up with a spiral. Get that taller. So something that helps me keep my thickness consistent as I go towards the top is having my elbow point straight up towards the ceiling of my inside hand. The other thing that you can do to kind of counteract it getting really wide too quickly is, rather than pulling straight upwards, you can almost pull straight towards the middle, and that way you're going to have more of a tapered cylinder, and you can widen it after you've worked on your pulling, and that way you can counteract your inside hand's impulse to kind of push outwards and make something wider than you want. Okay. rim is a little bit weird, so I'm going to chop that off. This is when your pin tool comes in handy. So you just kind of score a line and then push that tip right through there. Put my finger on the inside to catch it. Then you pull that off. That fixes a lot of issues that might show up for your pieces as you work. So this is still pretty thick. I think that'll give me a good surface to use the fork on. I'm going to try that technique again. Let's scrape up some off of the bottom. Just pay attention to the bottom a little bit and kind of give it a faux foot. I might end up trimming that out later on, but in case I don't get to it, I like having that backup plan of making the bottom look a little bit more resolved, because sometimes things dry faster than you really intend them to. And because I'm still getting used to working down here in the basement, I should err on the side of caution. So I'm going to use my fork again, and I'm going to start by kind of, let's do some wiggly lines instead of just straight up and down. Let's see if we can make it be a little bit more interesting. It's the fun part of clay, is you can experiment. I don't really have any huge expectations for this, so now's the time to try something new. Of course, when you're trying to make something specific, it's a little bit more pressure. If you're making multiples of things, the drive to make them very similar is a little bit more inhibiting, but this is kind of a new thing, so I feel okay about trying something new. Give this a wiggle all the way up. So I'm trying to keep my pressure kind of consistent from each set of squiggles that I'm putting on here, so that one part isn't deeper than another. Alright, it's a little bit more abstract. So as I've been scratching, I just kind of pull that extra clay off of the tines. Hey Brad, thanks for the encouragement. This is my exercise for the day. Can somebody give me another time check? Kind of in a black hole down here in the basement, and I can't really wear my watch when I'm throwing. So I'm going to get this back up to speed. I'm going to work from the inside to stretch this out. So my inside hand is on the wall closest to me. And just kind of a steady, even pressure as I pull my sponge hand up. 12:55. Thank you, Molly. So, as I'm working on this one, does anybody have any questions? About technique or 171 in general? I want to make sure to mention that our next Facebook Live video this week is with Katie, and she's doing a Saturday morning yoga. And next week, to get your clay fix, Martha is going to be doing a sgraffito demo. That's a technique where you put color on your clay while it's still wet, and you use a tool to carve through it. Kind of sounds like the word graffiti, and it's scratch writing is kind of what it translates out to be with my wide knowledge of Italian. But that's a technique Martha's been working on for several years, and she's doing that on her pieces for our mosaic exhibition, which is our big fundraiser. I've been working on some pieces for that too. They're not wheel thrown, they're all hand-built pieces, but Martha is working on some molded bowls for her installation. So right now I'm just kind of working on this rim, getting a neck established, kind of focusing on that texture being down at the bulbous part of this vase. I might stretch that out a little bit more. Let's check to see if any more questions. If you go through the surface with the fork, can you repair it? At this stage, it would probably be pretty difficult to repair it because it's so sticky and wet. I don't know if we could get a patch to stay put, but you know, I haven't worked with this technique enough to repair it or to see all of those possibilities. So you know what? I am not positive. We would have to try it out. And I figure that's probably going to happen to me at least once. If I keep doing this, I'm going to find the limit of what's too much. And that is something that I am very accustomed to. Us clay people are probably a little bit more practiced with failure than some of our other art colleagues who expect something to work and it works. That's not quite the story with clay. So I'm going to stretch out that shoulder bit a little bit more. The hardest lesson to learn with clay is when to stop. I was having that predicament yesterday night when I was practicing these pieces. You always want to do just a little bit more. Thanks, Molly. Yeah, this is kind of a fun thing to try. Another fun thing that I like to work with to kind of texturize something is using one of our cheese slicers or wire tools to kind of facet the edges. I'll show you one of those tools in just a second. So I'm going to use that chamois again right on the rim so that I stop touching this. Try and do my finishing touches. I tend to have pieces with short necks. They're not quite so tall and elegant, but more squatty and full. It's kind of the story of my life. So I'm just going to add a little bit more of a transition. I'm going to use this corner of the rib, kind of add like a decided band right here. I don't know if I like that. Hi Beth, joining in. Just finishing up this piece. I don't really like that, so I'm going to try and smooth it out. But let's take a look, see how this turned out. So we stretched it. Those wiggles got wider. I think they got a little bit more wiggly and stretched out. And this will be kind of interesting to see how it works in an atmospheric firing, either the wood fire or the raku, because all of those channels are going to collect glaze as they get fired. If they go into a raku kiln and get carbon in them, they'll be black. If it goes into the wood kiln, the wood ash might trail in there and create some really interesting effects. So let me adjust, thanks Beth, let me adjust the camera so that we can see this a little bit better. I'll hold it up first. So, talked about yoga on Saturday. We have another clay class next Thursday, same time. Oh, no, not at the same time. It's going to be at 1 o'clock. And the other way that you can kind of help support 171 while you're at home. We're still kind of working behind the scenes to get classes into this digital space, to give you more live demonstrations and trying to have our classes be on the web in some form or another. So keep checking back to our website. That's a good place to see our updates. And of course, if you're on Facebook, our Facebook posts will talk about that. The thing that we're really trying to look forward to is our summer camps, which are going to start the first week of July, July 6th. Each week has a different theme. We have something for 6 to 8-year-olds, for 9 to 12, for teens, 13 and older. We'll have more intensive kind of specific classes for them to expand their skill set and get some new techniques in there. So be sure to check out our website. That's the best place to find our up-to-date information and where you can find the information for when we are going to open back up, because the governor has pushed our school closure until the end of April. We're kind of following that schedule as well. So May would be the earliest that we would see you next. So keep an eye on all of our posts so you can keep in touch with us. If you have pictures of things that you've been doing at home, we'd love to see them. Just share them to our Facebook page, or you can send them to my email, which is warrena@171cedarartscenter.org. cedararts.org, no center. Or you can post them on our wall on our Facebook page. We'd love to see what you guys are working on and keeping your creative juices flowing as we're all kind of home and working through this. So let me just double check, make sure I got some questions. Hi, Dad. Oh, and we have our virtual gallery. Mitchell last week went in and gave us a tour of the work that's in our gallery right now, which is a student faculty show. So I have a couple of pieces that are in there. Martha has some pieces. Our other ceramic instructors, Fred and Kirk, have pieces, but there's lots of paintings as well. They are all for sale. So if you are looking to help support us in another way, that is a way that you could lend your support and help support our local artists, because you know everybody's trying to adapt to this, and it's a hard thing when you can't really sell your work, but you have the ability to see them virtually. It's not as great as the in-person thing, but it'll do. You'll get a good gist of what's available. So that is also on our website for you to peruse at your leisure in your jammies on the couch. So I think that's kind of it for now. Thanks for coming. Dad wants to know if the clay is warm or cold. It's lukewarm. It's room temperature, enough that I can touch it without feeling shivery. Just looking at my other questions. I think that's kind of it. If I miss something, I will go back and add comments to this in the thread afterwards. And of course, you can see this again if you'd like to. It'll be on our Facebook page for you to watch later on if you want to try it yourself. So thanks, guys. I hope to see you soon, and stay tuned for more from 171.